welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast, your guide to help you manage life, money, and multiples. Each episode, host Paul Fenner, Tama Capital's president and founder, and the proud parent of 4 amazing children, including 1 set of triplets, will provide insights on successfully sustaining an active lifestyle, career, and family through comprehensive wealth management strategies, financial education, and lifestyle planning, specific to parents raising twins, triplets, and more. Learn more, subscribe to the show, or connect with Paul at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Are you trying to find time to do more things that matter to you? Are you trying to squeeze more enjoyment out of your life? Laura Vanderkam, a time management expert, walks us through her latest book, Tranquility by Tuesday, in which she identifies 9 ways to calm the chaos and make time for what matters most. A topic we address by asking, how can we ensure you have the time to work on your long-term goals? A returning guest to our podcast, Laura previously did extensive research on the transition from working in an office environment to working from home. A focal point of this transition involves setting boundaries, a foundational element in her new research in making time to do what matters most to you. Don't set yourself up for failure was a critical point that Laura emphasized. By ensuring objectives and goals are reasonable, we can limit the amount of resistance that could be waiting to deter us from success. Laura helps people determine if something is important by identifying if an event occurs 3 or more times in 1 week. She also asks, if you are on vacation, would you still want to ensure this habit endures? One of my favorite rules Laura lays out is 1 big adventure, 1 little adventure. It is a reminder that even little things in life, such as a date with your significant other or playing catch with your kids, can be an adventure that makes life more memorable. Please enjoy my conversation with Laura Vanderkam. Well, Laura Vanderkam, welcome back to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
It's always exciting now that the podcast has been around for just a little over 2 years is to start having these additional conversations or follow-up conversations, because when we had you on last time, we talked about your book, The Corner Office, which was, the timing was perfect because we were transitioning to work from home life. But now you are out with your latest book, Tranquility by Tuesday, that we're going to focus on today, which I'm very excited about. But when I was going back to listen to our prior conversation, one of the questions I didn't get to ask you was, how did you decide to become a time management expert? So I think let's start there.
Yeah, well, it turns out most people don't grow up saying, I want to be a time management expert. It's not quite like fireman or something like that. But I have probably always been interested in how people make themselves more productive, how people achieve their goals. I've always enjoyed reading things along those lines. Thinking about my own schedule. It probably became more of a priority for me around the time I became a parent for the first time. And anyone who's been through that transition knows that it really does shape how you spend your time. I mean, not just the care of your children, which obviously can be all consuming, of course, but it's also about, how do I make space for that amid everything else I also need or want to do? And you're just more accountable for your time in a way many people haven't quite experienced before. Sometimes people find the transition rough, but I decided to look around and, see people who were doing it well, people who were successfully building careers they loved, raising happy families, involved in their communities. And, what are they doing? Because it turns out they don't have any more time than the rest of us. We all have the exact same 24 hours in a day. And so if people are managing to do amazing things with their lives in those 24 hours, I want to learn their secrets.
So, and just to remind the audience, you have 5 kids, right?
I do. I do. Although I didn't when I started on writing about all this. It's been very helpful as time has gone on. And I'm like, sure, you can do everything. And then I'm like, have another kid. And I'm like, okay, yes, you can still do everything. Like, I keep figuring it out. But yes, life becomes more complicated the more kids there are, more juggling. But it also, I think, becomes a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and that's one thing you mentioned in your book too, is most people know about my situation where I have these triplets plus one and they're all clustered together. So they're about 2 years age apart, but only 1 grade apart. But yours are more spread out. And you notice that difficulty where like you have teenagers that want to, go to bed late versus younger kids that need to go to bed early, and how to strike that, like square that circle, I guess.
Yeah, we're aware of a lot of the hours of a day in this house. There are quiet hours when everyone should be down, and usually there are, but there probably are fewer of them than I might like. But yeah, we have kids ranging from 15 to 2. And so you're getting all sorts of experiences together. We're signing a kid up for driver's training and potty training and other ones. So we really got both ends of the spectrum.
I don't know if that's like more or a bigger challenge or compared to my own situation, because everybody, whenever I say triplets, everybody like gasp, like, oh my God, like how do you do that? But I think obviously every situation is different, where your situation, there's probably things that are easier and harder. Just like in my situation, there are things easier and harder. So
yeah, I mean, I think in parenthood, we don't want to play the game of whose life is harder. I think
right.
Everyone
it's all hard.
It's like everyone's just doing the best they can. And so, we have different situations, but, we also have different kids. And so somebody could conceivably have 6 very easy children or 1 very difficult child. I mean, who knows? Like it really just doesn't, there's no point in having that comparison.
So I think I want to actually start off with a quote from your book. And I think this is from Plan on Fridays. And I'll have you outline the 9 strategies that you lay out in your book. But you write, to calm the chaos, we need to think about how we'd like to spend our time. We need to think about any stretch of time before we are hurtling through it. We need time to pause in the calm shallows and think about what we need to do and what we want to do. This becomes even more important as time becomes limited. And so based on that, why did you decide to write Tranquility by Tuesday? Like, how did you get to this point in your writing career?
Yeah, well, Tranquility by Tuesday arose out of an observation I've made a couple years ago, which is, I've had thousands of people track their time for me, share their schedules with me. Many of them ask for advice. And I realized that I was often giving the same advice, right? That even those people's lives are incredibly different, I could hone the suggestions I was giving people down into certain categories and certain things within those categories. And so I decided to come up with these 9 rules. These are the things that I was telling people to do most often when they were coming to me for scheduling advice. And since I write time management, self-help for extremely busy people, I really don't want to just be like, yeah, here's some ideas. See what you think. So I decided to try them out. I had 150 people learn the rules. Each week they would learn a new rule for 9 weeks. I could ask them various questions about how they plan to implement the rule in their lives, how it went. A week later, I measured them on various dimensions of time satisfaction over the course of these 9 weeks, and learned that the people who, attempted to put these rules into their lives did in fact see their time satisfaction levels rise to a very significant degree. And so that was pretty cool to see that, it did, prove helpful in people's lives, and also that they were willing to share their observations of, how it worked, like what it is like to put these rules into a regular busy life. And so the bulk of Tranquility by Tuesday is those people's observations.
And I think that was one of the interesting things, like when you first start reading the book, is that this is actually based on people's experience, like these 150 people that you just mentioned. So my question around that is, where did the 150 people come from?
Yeah, well, I mean, they had to be in my universe somehow, because obviously, to get into a study like this, I had to either know of them or they had to know of me. So, I sent out emails to my lists. I posted on, social media, on my websites. I, recruited broadly, like asked people to, tell their friends and everything like that. So demographically, I know most of the people were in the same group of people who tend to read my books, namely, people who are in what I call the busy years, where they are building careers, they are raising families at the same time. So the majority of the people who did the survey worked full time for pay. The majority had kids under age 18 at home, and so yeah, they were living these lives where a lot of their time is spoken for. They have a lot of responsibilities. I suspect they're all fairly competent, put together people in that they are managing to do this project for 9 weeks and stick with it and answer the questions and all that. So I was glad to see that, people whose lives didn't suggest that they were wasting a lot of time in the first place still found benefits from thinking of their time according to this framework.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you put this in the book, but maybe I wrote it or read it on one of your website pages, but the fact that I think it surprised you even that here you have all these busy people, but they carved out the time to provide feedback. And I think you mentioned not just normal feedback, but pretty in-depth feedback that you use throughout the book.
It was, it was shockingly easy to write this book, I have to say. Sometimes
and that's saying something because book writing is not an easy feat.
No, but I mean, conducting the research project was challenging and all that, keeping the data compiled and, putting everything together. But, sometimes with books, I'm like, okay, well, I've got this point and, I want to show this and now I need to, find the right person to show this. And so I'm going out through my contacts and like trying to get people to talk about it or whatever. For this, I was picking from like 100 answers, responding to like how challenging it is to get in bed on time and yet what you could do to solve this problem. And so I was able to, choose some really good ways to illustrate these points. And I'm very grateful for people taking the time to do that. But I think it's related to the fact that, people want to spend their time well, and not just in the sense of being productive with like the quote marks that get around productive. I mean, we get our stuff done. We these people stuck with this project. They're the sort of people who make their deadlines at work. They get their families where they need to go at about the time they need to be there, but they want to enjoy life more. And that is what I was asking people to do, right? That's what I was asking people to figure out, how you can put things into your life that you are genuinely looking forward to. How you can change the experience of your leisure time to be more rejuvenating, how you can leave space in your life so you're not feeling like you're constantly frantic, things like this. And I think people enjoyed reflecting on those matters.
So that was actually a good lead into my next question, because you often stress this point of thinking strategically about time. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by this, and then more importantly, how do you do it? Like, how do you strategically think about your time?
Well, and in general, my goal is always to help people find more time for what matters and to spend less time on what isn't important to them, whatever that happens to be. I think a lot of us sort of just go through time doing whatever is in front of us, right? Whatever is most urgent in the moment. Would we look forward and we plan, we're thinking about what's happening. We know the landscape in terms of if you have a conference next week, you are aware of that fact, right? Like it's just, people forgot that element of it. But it's a little bit different to say like, well, what are my long-term goals and how can I make progress toward those? And what can I do in the next week or two to make progress toward those long-term goals? How can I make sure those things happen? Meaning, how can I make sure that anything that might logistically conspire against me making these steps is dealt with? And how can I solve those problems? And so I was teaching people to look through their upcoming time with that mindset. So not just asking themselves what is happening, but what is important to me and how can I make sure that those things happen too?
So I imagine like mindset is a pretty cornerstone of your work throughout, the books that you've written. I know I've read a lot on mindset. Carol Dweck, who's like, I don't know if you call her the godmother of mindsets from Stanford, but what new ideas have you learned about how to change your mindset? Kind of like piggybacking off of that last point, like what have you learned that you have found to be helpful for people to decide, okay, I'm actually going to make the time to work on this long-term goal rather than getting sucked into just what's in front of me right now?
Well, I think one of the best things you can do is to make sure that any of the steps you are taking toward that goal are reasonable and don't inspire a whole lot of resistance. I think where people go awry is they set these big goals. I mean, in all the literature, people get excited about the big, hairy, audacious goals or whatever it is. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I mean, it can be very inspiring. I agree. But what you are doing to achieve those big goals in any given day needs to be doable, or any given week. It needs to be doable. And by doable, I mean it needs to fit with your life as your life is now. And so people often have this idea of the future, that future them will have fewer conflicts, future them will have more energy, future them will, have solved various problems that current us is just, really wrestling with at the moment. And so you see this of like, people like, well, in my New Year's resolution, I'm going to go to the gym for an hour every day after work. I'm like, well, why don't you go tonight for an hour after work? I'm like, well, I can't tonight because of this. Like, well, why are you going to be different on January 3rd than you are today? And if you don't want to go today, you're not going to want to go then either. Like, you're setting yourself up for failure if that is what you are aiming for. If you assume that you are going to be the exact same person in the future as you are now, then you can make rational decisions about what you could do. And you can do amazing things in the long run, but it has to be things that you are willing to do in small amounts currently. One of the Tranquility by Tuesday rules is even sort of getting at this idea. It's rule number 4 is 3 times a week as a habit. And a lot of times when people think they want to, adopt something new in their life, or they want to scale something up that they have, they're like, well, I should do it every day. And right there we have a problem, because almost nobody does something every single day. Like, people who work full time are like, well, I go to work every day. No, you don't. Most people have 2 days a week that they don't go to work, right? And those are real days. Like, they really count. And yet we think of this as every day when it's only 5 days a week. And so, I think in general, things can be an important part of your life if they happen 3 times a week. And often 3 times a week is far more reasonable than attempting to do something daily. So we're not saying I'm going to exercise every single day, like in terms of a full formal workout. Maybe it's like, I'm going to run for at least 20 minutes 3 times a week. Now, can that happen? Well, that may have a better chance of happening. It helps to think, like, would I do this habit if I was on vacation? Would I do this
that's a
habit
good one.
if I had a very busy week at work? Would I do this habit if I was traveling for work? Would I do the vacation one? I think is really critical. I wrote a piece a while ago saying, like, that's the question you should ask about any given habit to see if it's going to stick, because that means you're looking for ways to do it. You're not looking for ways to get out of it. I was on a cruise a few years ago. And the opening, sort of when the cruise director is giving his little spiel on the stage, and he was, there to explain like the stuff about the ship, but he was also saying, oh, well, and we have great food here, and everyone's diets are now kicked to the curb. And he does this huge thing with his foot kicking up in the air, and everyone goes, woohoo, everyone in the audience. And I was thinking of this, I'm like, that's fascinating. Like, because why, I presumably people have, goals and desires about healthy eating. And so why are they excited about not following those on a vacation? And in fact, I would say, like, in some cases, one of the big appeals of a cruise ship, people think, is like, oh, it's all you can, all this food. Eat. Oh, it's great. All you can eat. I don't have to follow any of the diet rules. It's like, well, they clearly don't really want to follow the rules, because you're looking for ways to get out of it as opposed to ways to stay with it. And I don't care what anyone eats, and you can, eat whatever you want on a cruise ship. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not, judging people for this. I'm just saying, like, well, if you're going to adopt a habit, think, well, would I do this on a cruise ship? And there are habits that people do. Like, people brush their teeth. I am sure that the vast majority of us brought our toothbrushes on that cruise ship. And we would have found it weird if the cruise director had been sitting there saying, and now that you're on the ship, you don't have to brush your teeth at all. Like oral hygiene is kicked to the curb. Like, he wouldn't have said that, like, because it doesn't inspire any resistance, right? So we want habits that are more like that.
So sometimes this resistance can work for us or against us then. Is that?
Well, I think you need to figure out, if you're setting yourself daily or a couple times a week steps that inspire a lot of resistance, it's going to be very, very hard to stick with something.
Over the long term, it will wear you down.
It will wear you down. And things will happen in your life that will make it very challenging for you to do it. But if you can come up with things that are more doable in the short term, or that you don't feel resistance to doing right now, then probably you will be able to stick with those. And if you choose them wisely, you can do kind of big projects. I mean, just as an example, I do a yearly reading challenge. So each year I set some sort of big reading goal that I break down into very doable steps. And in 2022, my goal was to read through all the works of Shakespeare. And it turns out you don't have to read that much in any given day. If you're reading 365 days in the course of the year, you only have to read about 3, maybe 4 pages in my illustrated anthology of all of Shakespeare's works. And so I can do that in about 10, 15 minutes. And so that's what I do, because it doesn't bother me to read for 10 minutes in a day. Now, if I was saying, I'm going to read all of those, like I'm going to read a play a day, and then I'm going to read, all these other books too, like that would be really challenging to have that as a goal. But since it's only 10 minutes a day, it's very doable. But because I keep doing it for all 365 days in the year, continuing, by the end of this year, I will have in fact read through everything he's written.
Do you have something visual along those lines that you check off that, yep, I read my Shakespeare for today, check mark?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes if I think I will forget, I'll put it in my planner for the day. So, I call it my rituals. I do a couple things every day. And that's one of them. But, at this point, it's not something I'm going to forget very easily, because it's, I do it every single day. So, it's like, did I brush my teeth this morning? Check it off.
Right. I know with some research I've read that visual cue, like you see that check mark like every day, like you don't want to break that streak. I know Dan Pink is a big proponent of this. I think that's probably when I first learned it. But like having that visual reinforces that, okay, well, I didn't get my reading done today, so I'm going to do it like right now or later tonight or something like that, because the feeling of missing, far outweighs the feeling of actually getting it done to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you need to find what works for you. And I know a lot of people do enjoy crossing things off or checking things or otherwise. And if you find that is true for you, then absolutely, why don't you give yourself a gold star for every day you do it? Like make a chart and put a gold star there. Like whatever you think is going to be motivational. But ideally, you're also choosing something that you enjoy doing on its own. Right. So
there's less that's where like having less resistance works for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the, I think, interesting points I think about all your work that I've read is that as much as people may want this like one size fits all advice or plan, it really doesn't. It's no different than how we treat or raise each of our kids. Even like I get the question all the time, triplets, well, they must all be the same. No, they're individual people. But I think with your work, you make that a point, but you constantly throw out additional options for people. But with that underlying foundation, like if this doesn't work for you, try this. If this doesn't work, try that.
Yeah, because people are different. And in general, I mean, I'm aiming to say could rather than should. Like I fully admit that my life may be totally different from somebody else's. And so if the fact that something works for me is great, it may or may not have relevance for you, but maybe there are other things that you might be able to try. And if you sort of brainstorm ideas, I think that can also be helpful for sticking with stuff, just because maybe one of them is a more appealing solution to you for getting to the same goal. And so you should figure out, well, what is that? And if you have a list, then you can rate them on how appealing one is and the others, and don't do something that seems unappealing because you won't stick with it. But if it is appealing, then you just might.
So if we dive into a few of the details of the book, I don't know if it would be, because I want people to read the book, because that's how they're going to really take out the nuggets from this. So we'll definitely have a link in the show notes to where to purchase the book. But there's 9 rules that you come up with. So, and I know I was on a webinar with you before where I think somebody asked you, like, what's your favorite rule? It's like, well, it's like picking, like, who's my favorite child. I can't do that. So I think what would be like 2 or 3 rules of the 9 that you want the audience to know about?
Yeah, well, I'll just list a couple that I think, people could start doing fairly quickly. One is to give yourself a bedtime. So this is rule number 1, for the simple reason that life is more doable when you are getting enough sleep. And it turns out, in fact, that most people are getting enough sleep from a quantitative perspective over longer periods of time, because most of us have a fairly strong sleep set point that our body's going to aim for. But the problem is we tend to overshoot or undershoot that number in any given night. You know how this is, like early in the week, people are up late, and then you have to get up early for school and work and things like this. And then, as the week goes on, you're making up that sleep debt. So you wind up crashing on the couch in front of the TV, or sleeping through your alarm, or hitting snooze. And then you sleep in on weekends, and then you can't fall asleep at a reasonable time at night. And so then it starts all over with the cycle. It's so much better to get the amount of sleep you need every single night.
Even on weekends.
Even on weekends, right? Like the right amount, whatever the amount is you need, which you have to figure out for yourself. Like most adults, it's going to be between 7 and 8 hours a day. But some people are a little bit different than that, one way or the other. So good to know this about yourself. It's something you can determine if you track your time for a week or two. Like, where am I roughly aiming for? Get whatever that number is. Try to get that every single night. And many adults can't wildly change the number that when they wake up in the morning. I mean, you have to get up for work or get up to, for your household responsibilities. So the number that can change is what time you go to bed the night before. So in my case, it's math. It's just math. It is not a statement of what kind of person you are. It is not anything else like that. It is just math. I generally need to be up around 6:30 in the morning. I need 7.4 hours of sleep. So my bedtime is roughly 11 p.m. And that is what I aim for every night. And I don't always hit it. I mean, I am a grown-up. If I want to stay up late, I can. If I have a good reason, it's okay to stay up late. But if I don't have a good reason, knowing that that is the time nudges me to make a decision and hopefully get into bed by a time that is pretty close to that. And yeah, when I do that night after night, I mean, it's pretty amazing. If I've been doing it consistently and then I go to bed at 11 p.m. on Friday night, I will literally wake up at 6:24 a.m. because that's 7.4 hours. That is, what I'm doing. It's really uncanny. But when people did this in the project, their energy levels rose significantly. The proportion of people who said they were getting enough sleep to handle their responsibilities rose by a quarter over 9 weeks. So that was the first one. Sorry, I won't talk that long about all of the ones.
And that was I was hoping you were going to talk about that, because that one is, like, especially right now, near and dear to my heart, because I've read your work on this. I've read other people's work on this. Like, everybody knows how important sleep is, but one of the things that I'm struggling with is, like, I need that 7 to 8 hours of sleep as well, but I'm not getting like quality sleep like during the middle of the night. So I'm working with my doctor on, okay, well, there's got to be something else going on there that, you're not, you're too amped up by the time you're going to bed. I know you mentioned a couple, like, cool down or shut down routines as well in the book. So obviously I'm working on those too, but so I'm glad that you talked about that, because to me that one touches home to me right now.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just encouraging people to make sleep a priority, like, because there
Yeah.
may be various things you can try, and I, think they'd be worth trying, right? And some of them might be more appealing to people than others. I mean, some couples, for instance, wind up sleeping separately. It turns out both of them sleep better when they do, and that doesn't mean you can't have a loving, intimate relationship, but it does mean that maybe, once you've decided to sleep, you're not in the same place. Like, that's
Right.
something people do. Or, maybe it screens out of the room entirely. Maybe it's a different temperature when you're sleeping. Maybe it's the noises that are coming from outside. You need more white noise or something like that. I mean, there's just a million things you can try, and it's worth doing because, sleep is absolutely foundational. Another thing people can start doing, and like I said, I don't have a favorite rule, but this is one that is near and dear to my heart, is to have one big adventure and one little adventure each week. And what this is about making life more memorable. A lot of adult life can become kind of the same day to day. We have our routines, and routines are good because they make good choices automatic. But when too much routine stacks up, you start losing months, weeks, years in these memory sinkholes. Like, you can't remember where the time went because you didn't do anything memorable with it, right?
Right.
So to combat this, we set a goal of having one big adventure and one little adventure each week. A big adventure is something different, novel, interesting, out of the ordinary, memorable, that takes like 3 to 4 hours. So think half a weekend day. A little adventure might be less than an hour. You're doable on your lunch break or weekday evening, just as long as it's something that is out of the ordinary. And I find that this is a really good rhythm because it's enough to make life feel different. Like, it's not just, that was another week like all other weeks. It's like, oh yeah, that's the week we went mini golfing. And that's the week we went and tried the new gelato place. And that's the week we went hiking in that state park. Like, there's something to make the week feel different. But 2 adventures a week is not going to exhaust or bankrupt anyone. Like, we're not saying every single day you need to be doing something. If you have like 5 work days and, you do one little adventure one evening of that, like 4 other days, you can come home, put your pajamas on the second you walk in the door, and you're good, right? You're like, hibernate. That's fine. But maybe just one, do something a little bit different. And that rhythm will make life feel far more exciting.
The one that you didn't mention that I absolutely live by is plan for Friday.
Okay.
So I've been doing this for a long time, going even back to like my corporate days before I started TAMA, but now, so more that I'm on my own entrepreneur, carving out, I almost slipped. I said trying to, but carving out that time. And again, this is where you point out where you kind of lay out why Friday is a good day, especially like in the afternoon. But again, it goes back to everybody's different. Maybe Friday's not, your day, maybe it's another day. But the whole point is to carve out 20 to 30 minutes, every week to be able to get your mind wrapped around what you need to do next week or even the following week. And I think it kind of ties back to what you said earlier about, having these, like a long-term goal or objective, and you're needing to do a little bit of that every day, maybe not every day, but every week per se. And if you're not putting that on your to-do list or however you manage your time, the odds are you're not going to do it. You're not going to follow up with it. And so that to me is like, again, something that's easy for people to be able to use like right away from reading the book.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for spelling it out for people. Yes, plan on
Did I
Friday.
do a good job?
You did. Plan on Friday is rule number 2, which is, as you said, it's 2 parts, right? The most important is to plan. I think everyone needs a designated weekly planning time, a time when you reflect on what is coming up in your life and what you wish to have coming up in your life, right? So not just what's happening, but what's important over ideally the next week or so. I think Friday is, doing this on Friday is kind of takes this rule to the next level because there's just a lot of upsides of doing it on Friday, that you've been able to use all of Monday, right? If you plan on Monday morning, you can't use all of Monday. Friday tends to be a time that people aren't doing a whole lot anyway, so you can repurpose what might be wasted time into some of your most productive minutes of the week. And it also allows you to relax and enjoy your weekend. Like if you work a Monday through Friday sort of job, many times people get a little bit of trepidation going on Sunday, even if they enjoy what they do, because there's a lot of stuff waiting for them. They don't know what it is. They're feeling anxious about it, and that can kind of impact your ability to relax and enjoy yourself. Whereas if you have planned on Friday, then
If I interrupt you for a minute, I actually glad you made that point, because you wrote that in the book, and I thought that was a really good point that I didn't want people just to gloss over. Is that some people would think, well, let me just do it Sunday night, but then like all weekend long, you're getting all gelled up about, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that, and I think the whole point of this plan for Friday is to take pressure off, to take stress off of your plate, not add to it where you're saving it up for Sunday night.
Yeah. I mean, and, Sunday night, you might not be able, if you're having various adventures on Sunday, maybe you're not back until later, which you should. You should be using your weekend time for fun stuff. And yeah, no, I always, people spend a lot of time planning on Sunday, but then you haven't really had as much of your weekend. Usually there's some amount of time on Friday. For many people, this is a quieter day at work. But even if it isn't, like try to carve out 20, 30 minutes. Also, just it's practical. Like if you have to make appointments or meetings with people, like you're not going to get them on Sunday night. Like, so it's just like, whereas Friday it's business hours, so you will.
I think one of the things too with this whole concept of planning for Friday for me is that I actually get excited about it, because it's a chance for me to look forward and think about, okay, I've got some exciting things to do. Now, I will admit, honestly, to you and to the listeners, that I'm failing on the one big adventure and one little adventure. And that is my takeaway from finishing the book a few weeks ago and talking to you, is like, I'm committing to you and to my audience that's the one I'm going to work on, because I think that's the one that could really spur a lot of fun, a lot more creativity, and more importantly, like reduce the level of stress in my life, and I'm sure other people's lives that try this. Yeah,
you want something in your life that you are looking forward to. Right? Like, I know that sounds a little trite, but many of us don't have a whole lot of stuff that we're looking forward to. We have all this stuff we need to do. Like, we're kind of getting through it. But like, you probably have an objectively good life. Like, I'm guessing most of the people listening to this, like, you've got a career you're into. Maybe you got a family you're really enjoying. Like, you got cool stuff going on in your community that you're doing. Like, this is good. This is all good stuff. You should enjoy it. So like, how can you make sure that you are like, you're having stuff in your life that you're truly, excited to be doing, that you'll be happy to have done looking back on, and planning in adventures is one way to make sure that happens.
Yeah. One of my mentors that I work with, Dennis Mosley Williams, who I've had on the show before, that I've worked with for a long time. We have this idea as a wealth advisor. People don't necessarily think of a wealth advisor in this sort of frame. But one of my objectives in working with people is to help them lead a life less ordinary. Whatever that means to them is, and it's a strong tie now. I will always be able to tie this back to Laura Vanderkam, one big adventure, one little adventure, and to help people define, what that is. And if that's what I'm working to help people do, then that's I need to walk the walk.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Looking forward to some more good adventures from you. We'll have to make sure those happen.
Yes. So in kind of wrapping up the book, are there any other, I know that like when you launched the book, you put out a ton of guides to the book. Can you walk us through what those are and how people are able to get those?
Yeah, well, just come to my website and you can find them. But
which will be in the show notes. Yes,
lauravanderkam.com. Well, I put out a guide that is, a one, like if you want to discuss it with friends. So sometimes, people are, more accountable to other folks. And so if you wanted to read Tranquility by Tuesday with a group of friends and get together to discuss it, I have a guide for like one meeting, like you get together once and discuss it. If you want to go through the whole project, like people did, the 150 people in my book, they learned one rule at a time over 9 weeks, talked about ways to implement it. So I have a guide that you could do over 9 weeks, right? That's something that's available as well. I put out a little scorecard. If people go to my Instagram at Vanderkam, it's there on my saved story, so you can pull it there from there. But you can just circle which rules you've done this week, right? If there's any that you haven't done this week, that's fine. But sometimes it's helpful to keep track of our progress that way.
That's the one I like the most because it's one page and it's got them all on there with a blurb about each one, and that to me is my favorite. So
excellent.
So usually, my last question that I ask everybody is, what's the best thing about being a parent? But since you're part of the 2-timer club now, and back on the show again, I had to think about something else. So,
okay.
So this one is, what has been the best thing about writing this book? And just so our audience knows, this is book number, is it 7? For you?
Well, of my time management books, it's like book number 6, roughly. Yes, okay. 6, 7, somewhere in there. And I've written a few others on other topics. So it's like I love to write. I really do love to write. Well, let's see. I think that one of the best things about writing this book is precisely because it is so practical. I'm like holding myself to trying to do these rules, myself. Of course, like I chose because I think they're good. Like I think they are the key to having a well-ordered and fun life. And so I'm doing my own Tranquility by Tuesday scorecard every Monday on my blog. I talk about all 9 rules and how I did over the previous week on those 9 rules. And that's been pretty cool to do that series. And, every week I can sort of talk about how the week went. And, sometimes I will do stuff just because I know it's the rule. Like, if it's Sunday and I've only practiced the piano twice, I'm like, well, 3 times a week is a habit. I better sit down and do it. And it nudges me to take it more seriously. I know that I'm going to be practicing the piano 3 times a week. The other day, we're recording this before Christmas, but I ordered 2 books of Christmas carols, like to play on the piano, and they came, and it made my practicing like much more exciting the other night. It's like, I'm taking my fun seriously. And that's, what I want people to do.
Well, awesome. Well, Laura, I can't thank you enough for making the time to come back on and talk to us about the new book, Tranquility by Tuesday. We'll have lots of show notes, resources, lots of resources in our show notes where people can find you. But always a pleasure to talk to you, and looking forward to this, to the next big adventure.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.